The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the town of Hollows Peak into a golden hue, before darkness began its slow encroach. Birds chirped their last songs of the day, and the world was calm, seemingly at peace. But as the dark settled in, the peace was broken by a distant sound. It started as a faint whisper, the unmistakable sound of a young girl's laughter, innocent and light. The wind carried it across the town, rustling leaves and gently shaking the branches of trees. Those who heard it felt a strange mix of warmth and nostalgia, as if they were being transported to a distant memory of their own childhood. But then, just as suddenly as it began, the laughter was replaced by an ear-piercing scream that echoed through the night. A chilling, harrowing scream of terror that could curdle the blood and raise the hair on one's neck. Many years ago, on a night eerily similar to this one, a tragedy had occurred in Hollows Peak. Young Jane Arkansas, a bright and cheerful girl, once played in the town streets and laughed with her friends. She was the pride and joy of her parents, a beacon of hope and happiness in their lives. But one fateful night, her laughter was silenced forever, replaced by a scream that still haunted the memories of the older townsfolk. A wicked act, so terrifying and brutal, transformed the joyful Jane into something else. Some said she was now a vengeful spirit, forever trapped between the world of the living and the dead. Others believed she had transformed into a monster, consumed by rage and out for revenge. The kids would dare each other to whisper her name, transforming her tragedy into an urban legend, Jane the Killer. As the years passed, many tried to forget, hoping that time would heal the wounds and memories would fade. But in Hollows Peak, some echoes from the past refused to die. And as the last rays of light disappeared, the town braced itself for the night, knowing that in the shadows Jane might be lurking, waiting to continue her tale of terror. Hollows Peak was a peculiar place, a mix of the old and the new. Cobblestone streets intersected with modern roads. Old brick houses stood proudly beside sleek apartments, and kids playing with modern tech toys would sometimes run past ancient oak trees that had stood witness to centuries gone by. In the heart of the town was the marketplace, always bustling with activity. Shopkeepers yelled out daily deals, mothers haggled over the price of fresh produce, and children dashed around, their laughter filling the air. But ever since that haunting scream echoed one evening, a different kind of energy hung over the town. Lately, strange things had been happening. First, it was Mr. Thompson's cat, which vanished without a trace. Then Mrs. Rodriguez, the librarian, reported that her collection of old newspapers, chronicling the town's history, kept being mysteriously shuffled, with one particular article from decades ago always landing on top. It was an old newspaper clipping detailing the horrifying incident involving young Jane Arkansas. Some dismissed it as a prank by mischievous kids, but Mrs. Rodriguez felt a cold shiver every time she saw the article. She knew better than anyone that some stories in Hollows Peak were best left untouched. The strangeness didn't end there. Late at night, some claimed to have seen a shadowy figure moving silently through the streets. Its face, half hidden in the dim light, seemed pale, almost ghostly, with dark streaks that looked suspiciously like tears or perhaps something more sinister. Lena, a teenager with a penchant for ghost stories, was the first to name the shadow. She claimed it was Jane the Killer, back from the dead or whatever abyss she'd been banished to, lurking in the town once again. At first, her friends laughed it off, teasing her for her wild imagination. But when she showed them a blurry photo she'd taken on her phone of the silhouette against the moonlit night, even the biggest skeptics had to pause. Whispers spread through the town like wildfire. Some started setting up extra locks on their doors. Others began holding nightly vigils with their neighbors. The bravest, or perhaps the most foolhardy, tried to hunt the shadow, armed with flashlights and whatever weapons they could find. Amidst all this chaos was Detective Rosa Martinez, a woman who had seen her fair share of bizarre cases, but never something as unsettling as this. As the sun set, she patrolled the streets, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious figure everyone was talking about. But as night fell, the town's new nocturnal visitor remained elusive. All that remained were chilling tales, shadows that seemed a tad too long, and an atmosphere thick with fear and anticipation. The people of Hollows Peak knew deep down that they were no longer alone in the dark. Something or someone was watching. And whatever it was only just beginning. The sun was barely up when the chilling news reached every corner of Hollows Peak. Mr. Samuel Foster, the town's oldest resident and unofficial historian, had been found lifeless in his home, his face contorted in sheer terror. The scene was horrifying. The room was in shambles, papers scattered, furniture overturned, but eerily there wasn't a drop of blood in sight. Samuel's home, known to most as Foster Manor, was an old colonial house that had seen better days. Its wood had started to rot and its paint peeled off in huge chunks, making it look almost like a haunted house from those scary movies. But to Samuel, it was a treasure trove, filled with memories and relics of the town's history. To him, it was more than just brick and wood. It was a living chronicle of Hollows Peak. When Detective Rosa arrived at the scene, she could sense the dread in the air. Officer Mitchell, a tall man with a usually firm demeanor, looked visibly shaken as he briefed her on the details. "It's like he saw a ghost," he muttered, glancing nervously at Samuel's still form. But what caught Rosa's attention was not the state of the room or the lifeless body. It was a message scrawled on the wall, written hurriedly as if in panic. "Don't go to sleep. You won't wake up." It was the same haunting warning associated with Jane the killer. But why Samuel? He was a kind old man who spent his days telling stories to kids and sharing history lessons with anyone willing to listen. As Rosa delved deeper into the investigation, she discovered something that sent chills down her spine. Among the scattered papers in Samuel's study, she found old sketches and illustrations depicting a young girl. The notes scribbled alongside hinted at a darker narrative, one that Samuel had perhaps discovered and was keen to understand. Had Samuel uncovered something about Jane that nobody else had? Was he trying to piece together the origins of the legend? Rosa couldn't shake off the feeling that the key to solving the mystery lay in these papers. The town was in shock. Samuel was loved by all, and the idea that he might have been the first victim of this shadowy figure was too much for many to bear. Fear gripped Hollows Peak. Parents hugged their children a little tighter that night, and the once bustling streets grew eerily quiet after sunset. Lena and her friends, initially curious and excited by the ghostly tales, now felt a genuine fear. They huddled together in Lena's room, discussing the events and trying to make sense of the eerie photo and the terrifying incident at Foster Manor. As night approached, a thick fog blanketed the town. Streetlights flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced with the wind. Every rustle, every distant howl, every creak in the floorboard became a source of terror. The darkness held a promise. Jane was out there, and no one was safe. In a town like Hollows Peak, where everyone knew everyone, stories traveled fast, and as fear gripped the heart of the town, tales of Jane's haunting powers began to emerge. Jared, a trucker who often passed through the town late at night, was the first to speak up. He recalled a night just a week ago when he saw a figure standing in the middle of the road. As he slammed on the brakes, the figure just vanished, only to reappear on the side of the road, staring right at him with cold, emotionless eyes. "It was like she could teleport," he murmured, still shaken by the memory. Then there was young Mia, a 10-year-old with a vivid imagination. She narrated how she had once spotted Jane outside her window, perched on a tree branch. But rather than climbing, Jane seemed to glide between branches, her movements unnaturally smooth, like a shadow sliding across the walls. People whispered about Jane's uncanny ability to control shadows, using them to cloak herself, making her almost invisible in the dark. Old Mrs. Wilkins even claimed she had seen shadows move on their own in her garden, slithering and merging as if alive, with Jane controlling them from afar. But it wasn't just her stealth and shadowy skills that were fearsome. Rosa found an old diary entry in Samuel's belongings that spoke of Jane's incredible strength. The writer detailed an event where Jane was said to have lifted a grown man off the ground with just one hand, her grip unyielding and powerful. Detective Rosa also learned of Jane's heightened senses. At the town's diner, a waitress recounted a tale from her grandmother. The story spoke of how Jane could hear whispers even through thick walls or sense the approach of someone from miles away. It was as if she was always one step ahead, always watching, always listening. As the stories piled up, a pattern pattern began to emerge. Jane wasn't just a vengeful spirit, she was a force of nature, a being with abilities that defied explanation. With her power to manipulate shadows, unmatched strength, and senses sharper than any human, she was a formidable adversary. Lena and her friends, trying to understand these strange tales, tried to replicate some of them, hoping to debunk the myths. But every attempt only deepened the mystery. When they played a whispering game, with one person standing several yards away from the group, they realized just how incredible Jane's hearing must be to discern whispered secrets from a distance. Despite the palpable fear in Hollow's Peak, there was also a sense of awe. Some, especially the town's younger residents, were fascinated by Jane's abilities, discussing them with a mix of fear and admiration. Some even tried to defend her, saying she was just misunderstood, a victim of circumstances driven to these extremes by her tragic past. But as the nights grew darker and the stories grew wilder, one thing was clear. Jane's abilities were no mere legends. They were real, and they were terrifying. And with each passing day, the boundaries of what she could do seemed to expand, leaving the town to wonder, just how powerful was Jane the Killer? Detective Rosa Martinez, with her sharp wit and keen sense of duty, knew she had to delve deep into the mysteries surrounding Jane to protect Hollow's Peak. Every piece of evidence, every story, and every myth about Jane the Killer was a puzzle piece, and Rosa was determined to complete the picture. The police station had turned into a hub of activity. Charts, photographs, and notes covered the walls. One particular area was dedicated to a timeline, tracking the key events of Jane's life and the strange incidents that had recently occurred. Rosa decided to start from the beginning. She dove into the old records of Hollow's Peak, hoping to find any piece of forgotten history that might shed light on Jane's transformation. The older residents were her best source of first-hand information. She organized town meetings where people shared their memories and stories about Jane before the tragedy. From these sessions, Rosa pieced together a clearer image of young Jane Arkansas, a girl full of life, dreams, and happiness. A girl whose laughter echoed through the streets of Hollow's Peak. But there were gaps, lost periods where Jane seemed to disappear from records and memories. To aid her investigation, Rosa called in her old friend Adrian, a tech-savvy whiz with a knack for digging up information. Adrian scoured the internet, searching for any urban legends or stories that matched Jane's. His findings were astonishing. Stories similar to Jane's were found in towns across the country, suggesting that Jane might have been traveling, or perhaps these towns had their own versions of Jane the Killer. Lena and her friends, driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, became unofficial assistants to Rosa. They searched Samuel's home again, hoping to find something the police might have missed. It was during one of these searches that they stumbled upon a hidden basement. Inside of the room was filled with old tomes, symbols etched on the floor, and a circle made of salt. In the center lay a journal, its pages yellowed with age. It was Samuel's research, detailing rituals, incantations, and theories about spirits trapped between worlds. One passage caught Lena's attention. To summon a spirit, one must understand its pain, its desires. But to control it or free it, one must conquer its fears. Realizing the significance of their discovery, they shared it with Rosa, who grew more convinced that Samuel had found a way to communicate with Jane, or at least understand her better than anyone else. The breakthrough in the investigation came when Adrian found a video online, filmed by a group of thrill-seekers. It showcased an old, abandoned building. As they explored, the familiar laughter of a girl could be heard, growing in intensity, before the video abruptly ended. Rosa, recognizing the building as an old asylum on the outskirts of Hollow's Peak, decided it was time to face the legend head-on. Assembling a team, she set out to explore the asylum, hoping to find answers or perhaps even Jane herself. The town held its breath as Rosa and her team ventured into the depths of the decaying building, unaware of the mysteries and dangers that awaited them inside. The investigation was just beginning, and Hollow's Peak's darkest secrets were yet to be revealed. The old asylum stood menacingly at the edge of Hollow's Peak, its tall, broken windows resembling hollow eyes watching over the town. Nature had tried to reclaim it, with vines creeping up its stone walls and birds of prey nesting in its broken rafters. But there was an unnatural stillness in the air, as if even nature was wary of what lay within. Rosa's team consisted of seasoned officers, Adrian, and surprisingly Lena and her friends, who had convinced the detective that they could be of help, given their recent discoveries. Equipped with torchlights, radios, and a steely resolve, they entered the building. The inside was just as eerie as the outside. Dust swirled around in the dim light, creating ghostly patterns. The hallways were long and winding, filled with rusted medical equipment and old patient records scattered about. Echoes of whispered conversations from long ago seemed to bounce off the walls. As they ventured deeper, they began to notice something peculiar. Shadows moved in odd patterns, always staying just out of clear view. The air grew colder. Whispers grew louder. Rosa could feel Jane's presence growing stronger. In the heart of the asylum, they found an old therapy room. Chairs sat in a circle, and in the center was a single lit candle, its flame dancing eerily. Surrounding it were pictures of Jane as a young girl, and others of her victims, including Samuel Foster. The room seemed to pulsate with energy. Rosa cautiously approached the circle, but before she could react, the door slammed shut, plunging the room into darkness except for the faint candlelight. And then, from the shadows, she emerged. Jane the killer stood before them, her eyes cold, her face pale, her signature black attire giving her an almost ghostly appearance. "Why are you here?" she hissed, her voice echoing in the chamber. Rosa, gathering her courage, spoke up. "Jane, we want to understand. We want to help you find peace." A tense silence followed. Jane's gaze shifted between the faces in the room. It settled on Lena, a strange mix of recognition and confusion in her eyes. Lena, her heart pounding, stepped forward. "Jane, we've learned about your pain, your past, but this cycle of vengeance isn't the answer." The confrontation was intense. Each word spoken, each plea made, seemed to resonate with a force of its own. Jane, battling her inner demons, was torn between her insatiable need for revenge and the glimmer of hope the young girl before her offered. Hours seemed to pass. Stories were shared, tears were shed, and slowly, Jane's icy demeanor began to melt. She shared her pain, the torture of her existence, and her eternal bond with the shadows. Adrian, ever the tech guru, played recordings of the various tales of Jane from other towns, showing her the widespread impact of her legend. This seemed to strike a chord with Jane, as if she was seeing herself for the first time through the eyes of others. The climax of the confrontation came when Lena, using Samuel's journal, began an old chant meant to free spirits from their earthly chains. The room seemed to shake, the candlelight flared brightly, and shadows swirled around Jane. When the dust settled, Jane was gone. The room was quiet. The weight of the atmosphere had lifted, but had they truly freed Jane? Or had they merely opened a new chapter in the haunting tale of Jane the killer? Only time would tell. But for now, Hollows Peak could breathe a sigh of relief. Time doesn't move the same way for spirits. For Jane, the years since her transformation felt like a never-ending nightmare, with moments of clarity overshadowed by bouts of anger and sorrow. From her perspective, being trapped between worlds was a constant turmoil. In the earliest days, Jane was overwhelmed by rage and grief. The memories of the horrific event that changed her life forever played on loop. She vividly remembered the laughter, the taunts, the pain, and the fire. And then there was the darkness. The shadows weren't just her companions. They were a part of her, echoing her emotions. They amplified her desires, her needs. They whispered secrets of those who wronged her, guiding her towards her victims. With every act of vengeance, there was a brief moment of satisfaction, a fleeting feeling that justice was being served, but it would quickly vanish, leaving her emptier than before. She roamed Hollows Peak and other towns, her legend growing with each tale. She watched from the shadows as people whispered her name, as children dared each other to summon her. Sometimes she intervened, giving them a glimpse, just enough to fuel the legend. Other times, she merely observed, the weight of her existence pressing down on her. When Samuel Foster began his research, Jane was intrigued. Here was someone genuinely trying to understand, not merely fear. His attempts to communicate, though rudimentary at first, offered a glimmer of hope, but his sudden demise for which she was blamed, only added to her anguish. She saw Lena and her friends, the genuine curiosity in their eyes, their attempt to piece together her story. And she was there in the asylum listening to their discussions, feeling a myriad of emotions as her life was laid out, analyzed, and dissected. The confrontation with Detective Rosa and the group was a turning point. For the first time, Jane felt seen, not as a monster, but as a soul in pain. Lena's words, the stories from other towns, the chants, they pierced through the layers of anger and sorrow, reaching the girl she once was. Jane remembered her dreams, her aspirations, the simple joys of life. She remembered her parents, the warmth of their hugs, the lullabies they sang. She remembered her friends, the games they played, the secrets they shared. And as these memories flooded back, the shadows grew restless, swirling around her, reacting to her heightened emotions. When Lena started the chant, Jane felt a pull, a force trying to sever her bond with the shadows. It was painful, like being torn apart. But amidst the pain was a glimmer of hope, a promise of peace. Now, as she hovered in the in-between, free from the shadows yet not entirely part of the world, Jane had a choice. She could move on, find the peace she so desperately sought, or she could stay, protect the town, and ensure that no other soul suffered her fate. But for now, she just watched, grateful for the brief respite, for the chance to see the world not as Jane the killer, but as Jane Arkansas, the girl with dreams and love in her heart. The nights in Hollows Peak had grown colder, and an uneasy quiet had settled over the town. Rumors circulated that Jane's spirit was finally at peace, but not everyone was convinced. A group of skeptics, led by a mysterious outsider named Vincent, began performing rituals to challenge Jane's legend, eager to debunk it once and for all. Vincent was charismatic, with piercing eyes and an infectious confidence. He'd traveled to various towns, challenging local legends, and had now set his sights on Jane the killer. His motives were unclear, but his intentions were evident. He sought to dominate and control whatever spiritual entities he encountered. The townspeople watched in a mix of horror and fascination as Vincent and his followers set up camp at the old asylum, the very heart of Jane's legend. Night after night, they performed rituals, chanting incantations, drawing symbols, and daring Jane to reveal herself. One fateful night, the skies over Hollows Peak turned a deep shade of crimson. A howling wind began to blow, and an eerie fog enveloped the town. From the fog emerged Jane, but she was different. The shadows that had once clung to her seemed more violent, more chaotic. Vincent's rituals had not only summoned her, but had also unleashed the darkest parts of her spirit. Lena, sensing the impending danger, rallied the town. Rosa, Adrian, and her friends joined her side, ready to defend Hollows Peak. The stage was set for the ultimate showdown. As Jane approached the center of the town, Vincent stepped forward, a sinister grin on his face. He began chanting, attempting to control Jane. But Jane, with her newfound clarity and the strength of her bond with Hollows Peak, resisted. The shadows around her lashed out, targeting Vincent's followers and creating chaos. The battle was intense. The air was thick with tension, power, and raw emotion. Lena, drawing on the knowledge from Samuel's journal, started countering Vincent's chants. She was joined by the townspeople, their collective voices forming a protective barrier around Jane. Rosa and Adrian, using makeshift weapons and devices, tried to fend off Vincent's followers, pushing them back towards the asylum. The old building, already weak and crumbling, became the battleground for the supernatural forces at play. In the midst of the battle, Jane and Vincent locked eyes. Two powerful entities, one fighting for freedom and peace, the other for control and dominance. Their clash was epic, with shadows and energies colliding, tearing at the very fabric of reality. With Lena leading the chant and the town's collective willpower, Jane managed to draw energy from Hollows Peak itself. The town, its history, its memories, all came together, forming a wave of pure force. This wave surged towards Vincent, overpowering his defenses and breaking his hold on the shadows. The climax was explosive. A blinding light engulfed the asylum, and when it subsided, Vincent and his followers were gone. The building, having withstood the brunt of the battle, crumbled to the ground, taking with it the dark memories of the past. Jane, now free from Vincent's influence, looked at the townspeople, gratitude and love evident in her eyes. With a nod to Lena, she vanished into the fog, leaving Hollows Peak to rebuild and heal. The final showdown was over, but its lessons were clear. The power of unity, love, and understanding had triumphed over darkness, proving that legends might be built on fear, but they can be reshaped by hope. The dawn following the battle brought a new day to Hollows Peak. The red sky had cleared, replaced by a serene blue, dotted with fluffy clouds. The town, which had seen its fair share of fear and anguish, now basked in the afterglow of a hard-fought victory. But the scars of the showdown were evident. The rubble of the asylum lay scattered, a haunting reminder of the dark forces that had once resided there. Houses bore the marks of the battle, with shattered windows and singed walls. The streets were littered with remnants of the rituals Vincent and his followers had conducted. Yet, amidst the physical scars, there was a palpable sense of unity. Neighbors helped neighbors clear debris. Children, once terrified of even whispering Jane's name, now played freely, their laughter echoing in the streets. The town, once fragmented by fear, had come together stronger than ever. Lena, now regarded as a hero, took it upon herself to ensure that the true story of Jane was passed down. With Adrian's tech skills, they started a digital archive, collecting stories, testimonials, and artifacts related to Jane. Samuel Foster's journal held a place of honor, a testament to one man's quest for understanding. Detective Rosa, her skepticism replaced by a newfound belief in the supernatural, started a special division in the police force dedicated to understanding and dealing with paranormal incidents. Many laughed at the idea, but after the events of the showdown, few could deny its necessity. The local school introduced a curriculum focusing on local legends and history, ensuring that the younger generation learned about Jane's true story, not just the fearsome tales. Teachers emphasized the power of understanding, empathy, and unity, drawing lessons from the recent events. As days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, life in Hollows Peak began to regain a sense of normalcy. The story of Jane and the showdown became a popular topic, drawing visitors and researchers from far and wide. The town, once known for its chilling legend, now became a beacon of hope and resilience. But for the residents, the events were more than just tales to be shared. They were reminders of the strength that lay within each of them. They had faced their darkest fears, confronted powerful forces, and emerged victorious. They had learned the importance of unity, of understanding, and of standing up to darkness. Jane's spirit, though no longer visible, was felt by many. Gentle breezes on calm nights, soft whispers in the wind, and fleeting shadows were reminders of the girl who once sought vengeance but found peace. And while she no longer roamed the streets, her presence was a comforting reminder of the town's resilience. As the sun set on another day in Hollows Peak, the townspeople looked to the future with hope, determined to remember the past, but not be defined by it. The legend of Jane the Killer, once a tale of horror, had evolved into a story of redemption, unity, and the indomitable human spirit. Months had passed since the showdown, but the legend of Jane the Killer was far from over. Hollows Peak had become a hub for paranormal enthusiasts, storytellers, and thrill seekers. Campfire stories no longer revolved around vague myths. They now had names, faces, and testimonies tied to them. As night fell on Hollows Peak, a group of teenagers sat around a fire outside the remnants of the old asylum. The air was chilly, the remnants of the asylum casting eerie shadows that danced with the flickering flames. The teens, wrapped in their blankets, had dared each other to spend the night here, close to where it all happened. Tom, a brave or perhaps foolish leader of the group, began to recount the events that transpired, making sure to exaggerate certain details for effect. They say Jane's spirit still roams these grounds, seeking out those who dare to trespass. Sophie, a visitor to Hollows Peak, shivered. "Stop it, Tom. It's just a story." But as the night deepened, strange occurrences began. A soft lullaby floated through the air, its origin unknown. Shadows seemed to move on their own, growing longer and darker. The temperature around the campfire dropped, an unnatural cold gripping the group. The bravado the teenagers initially had started to wane. Whispers of fear passed between them. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig was magnified in the silence of the night. It felt as though they were being watched. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the edge of their vision. A young girl, dressed in a white tattered dress, her face obscured by her long hair. The fire's light flickered in her eyes, giving them an ethereal glow. The group froze, their hearts racing. Tom, once the bravest, was now as white as a sheet. Before anyone could react, the figure vanished, leaving behind a chilling breeze and the faint echo of a sad lullaby. The group, now thoroughly terrified, packed up and left in haste, their previous dares and bravado forgotten. As they retreated, the wind carried a soft message to them. Remember the true story. The next day, as the tale of their night at the asylum spread, the town was divided. Some dismissed it as the imagination of frightened teenagers, while others believed it was a warning from Jane herself. Lena, now an unofficial guardian of Jane's legacy, pondered the event. While she believed that Jane had found peace, she couldn't ignore the possibility that the spirit world operated on rules beyond human comprehension. Hollow's Peak, with its history and mysteries, remained a magnet for tales of the unknown. But one thing was clear: while Jane's story might have found its resolution, its echoes would linger, passed down as whispered nightmares, a chilling reminder of the thin line between the living and the paranormal. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to watch this next video on what drove a young man to become Jeff the Killer.